Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I take it all protocol observed. It is truly an honor to have been invited as a guest speaker at the 38th convention of the Islamic Medical Association of South Africa. I'm honored, I'm humbled. The topic that I'll be discussing deals with challenges facing the higher education system, and more specifically at the universities and the universities of technology dotted across this treasured land of Mzansi. It is this system that has produced many, if not all of us sitting here today. Some background. During apartheid, higher education institutions were reserved for different races, ethnic and linguistic groups. Both historically white and historically black institutions were products of apartheid. The planning and the functional differentiation to develop and reproduce the apartheid order. This racially separated differentiation was accompanied by a set of conditions that disadvantaged especially the historically black institutions. Close to 25 years ago, South Africa entered a new era of democracy. The initial euphoria was tempered by the hard work that followed in transforming and rebuilding the major social institutions of the country to address the vast challenges of inequality, poverty, and the need of economic growth. Higher education systems, as it was then, was central to the projects of modernization, transformation, and renewal in the country, just as it is too subject to many forces. With the constitutional democracy created in 1994, all South African higher education institutions had to be liberated from the apartheid policies. The government's White Paper 3 policy in 1997, called A Program for Transformation of Higher Education, noted that many of the institutions required consolidation or retooling for new missions and goals. The policy also noted there was a need to diversify the education system in terms of a mix of institutional missions and programs that were required to meet national and regional needs in social, cultural, and economic development. The present higher education institutional landscape is a major advance on that of 1994, but there are legitimate concerns among historically black institutions that a policy of differentiation and diversity could continue the historical patterns of disadvantage and advantage in the absence of developmental strategies and institutional redress to enable them to build their capabilities and capacities to address social and educational needs. Much has been achieved in the past 24 years. The higher education sector is now more unified in terms of governance arrangements, quality assurance processes, qualification types, funding arrangements, and enrollment planning processes. Its offerings are organized on a single qualification structure designed to create clarity with respect to degree and diploma purposes and to bring coherence to the pathways between them. As much as the sector is becoming more cohesive, it finds itself in a new and fluid post-school landscape that questions higher education boundaries. This brings us to October 2015, which may be considered a milestone moment on the South African higher education timeline. It was a moment that shook higher education to its core. The clarion call was #fees must fall, which may be, #fees must fall, and that the fundamental aspects related to decolonization and transformation of higher education needed to be heard and brought to the fore. After the turbulence experienced in the first and third quarters of 2016, it is no surprise that the violent student protests of 2016 occupied center stage. The events of October 2015 initiated a critical re-evaluation of the domain of the higher education in South Africa by all the role players, namely national government, the Department of Higher Education and Training, the Council of Higher Education, USAF, which is a consortium representing South Africa's universities, students, and especially society at large. A number of challenges have been identified that are faced by higher education institutions as they embark on their plans for the next decade and contribute in playing a crucial role in the country as it works towards the attainment of goals and targets of the National Development Plan of 2030. The National Development Plan is a plan to unite South Africans, unleash the energies of its citizens, grow an inclusive economy, build capabilities, and enhance the capability of the state and leaders working together to solve many complex problems, least of all within the health sector. I've chosen 5 challenges in no specific order, and these are firstly funding, secondly research and postgraduate education, thirdly student access, fourth preparedness for tertiary education, and fifth securing the next generations of academics. The South African higher education system has undergone major reorganization since 2004. There are now 26 institutions, 11 traditional universities, 6 comprehensive universities, 6 universities of technology, plus a further 3 universities, which are new universities situated in the Northern Cape, Mpumalanga, and one focus on health sciences, which resulted from a demerger of Medunsa, which is now called Sefako Mukato. This restructuring on the higher education institutional landscape has had major implications on funding. Funding has shown a perceived increase in money being spent, but in reality, funding has actually declined in real and student per capita terms. This has put pressure on tuition fee income and research grants, contracts and donations. While the South African higher education system has experienced considerable growth, this growth has not been met with sufficient funding to enable the national goals of higher education to be met. The pre-2017 pre-ANC conference announcement by then President Zuma that free education for disadvantaged students would be implemented this year means that many universities are unlikely to experience the violent protests faced for the past 3 years. This, however, has come at a cost. How sustainable this funding will be to make up the shortfall. Many universities are now are faced with funding challenges greater than the pre-announcement. The NAFCES allocations, despite increases, are not adequate to meet the needs of eligible students, which has raised the question on how increased enrollments were to be funded. In terms of size, the differences between 1994 and the current state are marked. There are now almost 1 million students in the public sector, which represents an exponential growth from the 500,000 in 1994. Student demographics have changed, where institutions of higher learning over the last 20 years has shown a significant increase in excess of especially the black student. Since 1994, research outputs, enrollments, and graduations have increased, but these have remained low in comparison and in relation to national needs. Only 34% of academics have a doctoral degree. Universities' research performance are uneven, with 10 of the 26 institutions producing approximately 90% of all the research and of all the doctoral qualifications. The end of apartheid has not abolished inequality in the school quality, despite much greater resource inputs. There is still a large gap between the preparedness for higher education of learners from top quintile schools and those from the remainder, although the racial contours of inequality has been softened. Accordingly, most universities have found it necessary to continue and in fact intensify a variety of forms of academic support to students aimed at mitigating the articulation gap between schooling, and the demands of higher education. Foundation courses, forming an integral element of the extended curriculum, have constituted the major strategy of addressing the articulation gap. Academic staff recruitment and retention remains a challenge across the globe. A number of contributing factors have produced challenges for academia. One, the high attrition rate. Two, retirement of productive scientists. Three, a lack of state-of-the-art research equipment and facilities. Four, the general state-university relationships in Africa. And fifth, the poor PhD output rate in Africa compared to the rest of the world. In South Africa, the 26 institutions produce approximately 1,800 PhDs. In Brazil, one university, the University of São Paulo, produced 2,500 PhDs in 2010. South African academics are not adequately qualified. There's a general prerequisite of a doctorate for undertaking high-quality research. The pandemic of enrollment explosion has taken place in recent years without the commensurate growth in faculty members. Since 1994, the academic workforce has become more equitable, but still remains largely white and male. On the basis of the current retirement age of 65, in the coming decade, over 4,000, close to 30% of the academics will be retiring. The research performance of universities is highly uneven. Having said all these challenges that we are faced with, colleagues, the situation is not as bleak as what it is generally perceived to be. Yes, there are challenges that will make us stronger. South Africans have in their nature and in their history proven themselves to be truly resilient. Many of our South African institutions feature on the top university world rankings. Of the 26,000 institutions internationally, globally, South African institutions feature in the top 600. The University of Johannesburg, for example, is ranked in the top 4% of the 16,000 ranked institutions. We are a member of the prestigious Universitas 21 consortium, which features 25 world-class universities. UJ is the only African institution that forms part of this group. Our Faculty of Health Sciences definitely punches above its weight. It is the only institution that features within the top 500 health sciences faculties without a medical school. And I'll have to qualify that yet. We are planning to establish a medical school. As South African universities, we are thus faced with two futures. Future one, an underfunded system with all indicators, an over-enrolled system, a productive academic force that exits in large numbers, a system unable to produce quality graduates, and a system's contribution to national and global development that is undermined. Or we face a future with an adequately funded system that is able to meet the developmental needs of South Africa. Like many of the other challenges faced by South Africans, decisions that are made today will have an impact on a future generation. I pray that these decisions will be guided by wisdom. I wish all participants all the best for the remaining sessions of the convention. I thank you. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.